I never thought my cars would cause so much drama. But then again, I never expected to be the target of a petty HOA board with too much power and way too much time on their hands. This all started about a year ago. I had just moved into a quiet, well-manicured neighborhood gated community. Nice people, decent amenities. The kind of place you think will give you peace. I'm a car enthusiast. I don't mean loud drag races or showing off, just someone who appreciates a good engine, a beautiful body, and clean chrome. Over the years, I'd collected some vintage beauties. Nothing excessive, just for classic cars I kept in perfect condition, rotated them in and out of the garage, and made sure not a drop of oil ever touched the driveway. But apparently, in my new neighborhood, 4 cars was one too many. At first, it started with little comments from neighbors. Harmless stuff like, "You must really love your cars, huh? Or you got a dealership over there." I'd laugh it off, thinking it was friendly teasing. But it didn't stay friendly. A few weeks later, I got a letter taped to my door. It was from the HOA Homeowners Association citing me for excess vehicle presence and aesthetic disruption. I read it twice. Was this a joke? My cars were legally parked, clean, and well-maintained. I wasn't blocking anyone's driveway. I wasn't running engines late at night. I wasn't breaking any real rule. But apparently, the HOA board had recently updated their policy to say each home could only have 2 personal vehicles parked outside on a regular basis. Anything more, and you were subject to additional fees. My first reaction was disbelief. I mean, who cares if I park my car in front of my own house? It's not like I had cars up on jacks in the front yard. These were classic, museum-quality machines. But disbelief quickly turned into irritation when I saw the fine they were tacking onto my HOA bill. $150 per car per month. And here's the kicker. They passed this policy update just a week before I got the letter. No public vote, no warning, no discussion. Just a quiet little meeting where 3 board members who clearly had something personal against me decided they didn't like my driveway. At that point, I could have done what most people do: complain a little, pay the fee, maybe move. But see, I don't like bullies, and the more I looked into this HOA, the more I realized it wasn't just me. They had a habit of targeting people for ridiculous things. One lady got fined for having a shade of beige on her curtains that didn't match the approved palette. Another guy got warned because his grass was 1 inch too tall. It was control for control's sake, and I wasn't about to be their next victim, so I did some digging. First, I learned who was on the board. 3 members, all longtime residents, all very proud of their little kingdom. One of them, let's call him Rick, was especially vocal. He drove around in a golf cart with a clipboard, snapping pictures of people's lawns, cars, fences, you name it. A full-time neighborhood cop without a badge. But here's where it gets interesting. You see, what the HOA didn't know when they tried to punish me for owning too many cars is that I also own a lot of real estate. I'm a developer, quiet one. I buy homes, renovate them, rent them out, and reinvest. It's my bread and butter. And before I even moved into this HOA neighborhood, I had quietly purchased several properties in the area as long-term rentals. They were managed by a third-party company, so nobody really knew who owned them. The mail didn't come to me. The tenants never met me. But legally, those homes, they were mine. In fact, out of the 50 homes in that HOA-controlled community, I owned 12. That's nearly a quarter of the entire neighborhood. And according to the HOA's own bylaws, any homeowner gets a vote during board elections. And the best part, there's no limit on how many votes one person can have. If you own 1 house, you get 1 vote. If you own 12 houses, well, you get 12 votes. Now that was interesting. I started by attending the next HOA meeting, quietly sat in the back, listened to them drone on about grass length, mailbox colors, and whose dog was barking too much. Then I asked to speak. I introduced myself as the owner of the property on Elmwood Drive. No, the one they fined for having too many cars. Rick, of course, gave me a smirk, like I was the dumb neighbor who just learned how HOA rules work. I asked a few polite questions about the car policy. I even brought printouts of the bylaws to confirm the recent changes. Then, right at the end, I casually mentioned, "Oh, and, by the way, I own 11 other homes in this neighborhood. You'll probably see me around more." You could feel the air shift. Rick blinked. One of the other board members literally dropped their pen. And me. I just smiled. The next day, I called up the property manager I use and asked for updated contact details for all 12 of my tenants. I sent each of them a letter explaining that their landlord was running for HOA board. And I wasn't just running, I was going to win. Legally, I held the votes. But to play it clean, I invited the tenants to a community BBQ in the park. Free food, music, games for the kids. And while they were there, I introduced myself, told them what was going on. I made it clear I wasn't going to raise their rents, change their homes, or interfere with their lives. I just wanted to make the HOA a place where people weren't punished for absurd things. And you know what? They were all for it. The election came a month later. Rick didn't even bother campaigning. He thought he had it in the bag. After all, he'd been on the board for years. But on election day, I submitted 12 ballots, all legal, all signed, all mine. Rick got voted off the board. So did his two little power-hungry friends. And I became the new president of the HOA. First order of business: repeal the car limit policy. Gone. Second, refund every unreasonable fine handed out in the last 12 months. Third, new rules requiring all future policy changes to go through full community votes, with at least 60% approval. But I didn't stop there. I launched a community garden program, opened the clubhouse for free weekend activities, and even arranged for neighborhood movie nights during the summer. Families started coming together. The tone of the neighborhood shifted. People were smiling more, kids were playing outside longer, and for the first time in years, no one felt afraid to plant the flowers they liked or repaint their door without someone snapping a photo and sending a threat. As for Rick, he still lives in the neighborhood, but these days, he keeps his head down. No more golf cart patrols. No more clipboard. He tried to challenge the election, but quickly learned that everything was done by the book. And you know what? He even started coming to the movie nights. Maybe he realized that control isn't the same as community. And my car's still right there, in the driveway, clean, classic, and completely compliant. Funny how fast things can change when the people being pushed around decide to push back. I didn't plan for a war over parking spaces, but once it started, I wasn't about to lose. So to anyone out there dealing with an overreaching HOA, remember this: learn the rules, own the game, and when the time comes, make your move. Not with anger, not with shouting, but with calm, calculated power. Because sometimes, the best way to win is to remind them that you were never the pawn. You were the one who owned the board. Becoming HOA president wasn't some lifelong dream. I didn't wear a sash or print business cards. Honestly, if they had just left me and my cars alone, I would have never gotten involved. But life has a funny way of nudging you into roles you never asked for. And once I had that gavel, once I saw how many people had been quietly suffering under this little neighborhood regime, I knew it couldn't just be about me and a few fines. It had to be bigger, so I did what they never expected. I listened. I walked through the neighborhood not in a golf cart like Rick used to do, peeking over fences but on foot. I talked to the single mom whose mailbox paint was 3 shades too light and got her fined $80. I sat with the retired couple who were afraid to hang a bird feeder because of uniform landscaping rules. And then there was the young couple who had been threatened with eviction notices over a small vegetable patch in their backyard. It wasn't about cars. It was about control. It was about power being abused in the smallest, most invasive ways. And I realized something. This neighborhood didn't need a president. It needed a protector. I started by opening up the meetings. No more closed-door policy. No more hidden rule changes. We live-streamed them for anyone who couldn't attend. We handed out monthly updates with clear explanations of where every dollar in HOA dues was going. We created a suggestion box. And the best part, people actually started participating. One woman suggested we install solar lights along the community path. Approved and done. Another neighbor proposed turning an abandoned corner lot into a dog park. The whole block pitched in shovels, fencing, even a hand-painted sign. The park is now the most popular spot in the community every evening. But not everyone was thrilled. You see, power, even petty power, is addictive. And some of the former board members didn't like seeing the changes. Rick, especially, couldn't accept that he was no longer the man in charge. He tried to stir the pot, sent out whisper campaigns, claimed I was ruining the community with loose rules, even went door-to-door complaining that my leadership was making the neighborhood less desirable. What he didn't know was that I had something he never did: trust. See. When people know you're fighting for them, not against them, they don't get swept up in rumors. They show up, they speak up. So when Rick tried to organize a recall vote, he barely got 5 signatures, and 3 of those people later apologized, saying they didn't even know what they were signing. Then came the cars. Again, apparently, Rick had submitted a complaintius, an actual formal complaint to the county zoning board, claiming that I was running a business from home due to excessive vehicle storage. He even tried to argue that I was using the community as a commercial car lot. So, what did I do? I invited the zoning inspector to lunch. Not only did I have every title and registration in order, every car was legally registered, insured, and privately owned. I even had a letter from my insurance company verifying that my property was not used for any commercial purposes. The inspector smiled, shook my hand, and said, "Looks like someone's just jealous of your collection." He left, and I never heard about that complaint again. But what happened next? That's where it really got satisfying. I was reviewing community financials one afternoon when I noticed something odd. Our reserves, the emergency funds the HOA was supposed to maintain, were way lower than they should have been. Way lower. I pulled the last 5 years of financial reports and started comparing, and that's when I found it. Multiple discrepancies. all leading back to the old board. Rick and his buddies had been approving maintenance projects with inflated costs, overpaying vendors who were suspiciously connected to their families or friends, and then using leftover funds to award themselves stipends for administrative duties. We're talking tens of thousands of dollars gone. Now this wasn't just petty anymore. This was theft. I consulted a lawyer and brought in a financial auditor. Quietly, thoroughly, we gathered all the evidence we needed. And once everything was solid, I called a special emergency meeting and presented it all to the community. Not with emotion, not with vengeance, just the facts, the documents, the bank records, the names. People were furious. Those same neighbors who had once ignored Rick's clipboard now saw him for what he really was, a grifter, hiding behind rules. By the end of that meeting, we had community consensus to press charges. A formal complaint was filed with the district attorney's office, and the case is still pending. But for me, that was closure. I didn't start any of this to destroy Rick. I started it because I was fined for having too many cars. But sometimes, what starts as personal becomes purposeful. I still live in that house. The same one. The cars are still parked out front. Some neighbors wave when they pass by. Now, kids ride their bikes up and down the street and stop to look at the old Mustang or the vintage Porsche. Moved out 3 months after the charges were filed. Sold his house quietly and left in the middle of the week. No goodbye, no apologies. And the HOA. It's no longer feared. It's respected. People attend meetings, bring ideas, vote. Dues are fair, projects are transparent, and enforcement is reasonable. We created something rare, a community that actually acts like one. And it all started with a letter on my door, telling me my cars were a nuisance. I guess sometimes, the people trying to push you out are the ones who end up opening the door for your greatest impact. So, if you're ever dealing with people who think they can control you through fear, fines, or authority, remember this: know your rights. Know the rules better than they do. Build allies quietly. Move strategically. And when the time is right, take the wheel. Because nothing drives change faster than someone who refuses to be parked. It's strange to think how one moment a printed notice on your door can unravel into something so much larger than you ever imagined. When I first got that letter about my cars, I thought it was ridiculous. Sure, but I didn't know it would become the start of a story I'd be telling for years. A story of quiet rebellion, of strategy, of community, and of a lesson in power that no HOA handbook could ever prepare for. The changes I helped implement weren't just about policies or parking spots. They were about people. And what happens when everyday folks are finally given a chance to speak in, to be heard. One of the most powerful things I noticed after taking over the HOA was how quickly the fear melted away. You wouldn't believe how many neighbors came up to me, not to talk about my cars, but to tell me their own stories. Stories they'd kept bottled up for years, some out of fear, others out of exhaustion. One elderly woman, living on her own, told me she was fined $200 because the flag on her porch, an American flag, by the way, wasn't on an approved mount. Another neighbor said he had once painted his shutters the wrong shade of brown wrong by 2 paint swatches and was fined and told to repaint or face legal action. And it hit me. It wasn't just about HOA rules. It was about control, intimidation, a system designed not to serve the community, but to police it. So I decided it was time to flip that system inside out. We started by rewriting the enforcement procedures. No more anonymous fines. No more surprise violations. If someone had a concern, they had to bring it forward at a public meeting with their name attached. That alone cut 80% of the nonsense. People who loved hiding behind the board suddenly had nothing to hide behind, and those who had real, honest concerns, they were finally being heard and taken seriously, respectfully. We made voting easier. 2. Online ballots, open discussions, and regular community check-ins. People who had tuned out for years were suddenly showing up, asking questions, volunteering. A retired teacher offered to tutor kids in the clubhouse on weekends. A stay-at-home mom organized a community cleanup. A high school student pitched the idea of building a little free library, and we funded it through community dues. The neighborhood, once divided and tense, started to come alive again. But of course, not everyone liked that. Rick didn't go quietly into the night. No, he tried every trick in the book. When the recall effort failed, he started trying to sabotage from the sidelines. Posting on neighborhood forums, twisting facts, even hinting that I had used shady tactics to take over the board. He went so far as to suggest I was using the HOA as a front to flip more homes and gentrify the neighborhood. So I did something he didn't expect. I invited him to coffee. I sat down with him at the local diner. Just 2 guys and 2 mugs of bitter coffee, and I laid it all out. I told him I knew he didn't like me. I told him I understood that losing control is hard. But I also told him the truth. I didn't need this job. I didn't want power. I wanted peace. For everyone, and if he ever wanted to help build something, instead of trying to burn it down, there would be a seat waiting for him. He didn't say much, mostly nodded, looked out the window. he never did come back to the board. But after that, he stopped trying to tear things apart. Maybe he saw something in me that he didn't expect. Or maybe he just realized his time was over. A few months later, something even bigger happened. A nearby community, one facing similar HOA problems, reached out. They'd heard what we'd done. Heard how we'd transformed a toxic HOA into a cooperative community. And they wanted help. They asked if I could attend one of their meetings, maybe share what worked and what didn't. I did, and that started something unexpected. Suddenly, I found myself mentoring HOA reformers across the county, sharing templates, bylaws, election strategies. I even hosted a workshop with over 40 attendees. What began as me defending my own driveway had turned into a small movement. And that's when it really hit me. This wasn't just a neighborhood story. This was a story about empowerment, about knowing your rights, about pushing back when things feel unfair, not with anger, but with intelligence, with facts, with quiet confidence, and with community. People often think that power comes from shouting the loudest or holding the biggest title, but that's not it. Real power comes from the people around you believing in what you stand for. That's why it worked, because I didn't fight for myself. I fought for the old woman with the flag, the family with the garden, the kid who wanted to read. I fought for everyone who felt like they had no voice, and I did it with a car parked in my driveway, a symbol of defiance, yes, but also of dignity, of standing tall, wheels polished, refusing to move just because someone in a golf cart told me to. It reminds me of something I once heard. You don't have to burn it down to take it back. Sometimes, you just have to own more of it than they do. So now, when I step outside in the morning and see my neighborhood waking up, kids hopping on bikes, neighbors chatting, someone walking their dog past my classic Camaro, I just see homes. I see a community that stood up. I see a system that was forced to evolve. I see a reminder that even the quietest homeowner can shake the entire street if they choose the right moment. And I think to myself, they raised my HOA fees over my cars. But what they didn't know was that I owned every house around them. And when you own the neighborhood, you don't just park the car, you drive the change. As time went on, things settled into a kind of peace I hadn't seen in the neighborhood before. The drama was over. The board meetings, civil, productive, even dare I say friendly. The community potlucks grew in size. The clubhouse became a hub, not just a symbol of HOA power. It was strange to see. At first, a place that used to intimidate people now held yoga classes on Saturday mornings and movie nights for kids on Fridays. But with peace came something else. Reflection. Looking back, I realized this story wasn't really about cars, or fines, or power grabs. It was about standing your ground in a world that constantly asks you to shrink. A world where playing by the rules sometimes gets you trampled by the people who make them. And I started to wonder, how many other communities were stuck like we were? How many neighborhoods had invisible ricks patrolling the sidewalks, dictating what joy looked like? That's when I had an idea. I took everything I'd learned from the experience: how to read bylaws, how to call fair elections, how to organize community support, and I built a free resource guide, just a simple PDF people could download. I shared it online, thinking maybe 10 or 20 people might read it. In a week, it had over 6,000 downloads. Emails started flooding in, from Arizona, from Georgia, from Canada, even from a couple expats in gated communities abroad. People wrote things like, "This is exactly what I've been going through. I thought I was alone. My HOA fined me for planting wildflowers. Thank you for showing it's possible to fight back legally and with grace. I've been afraid to speak up." Until now, some even called me a hero. I didn't know how to respond to that. I never set out to be anyone's hero. I just wanted to park my cars in peace. But apparently, that simple act of resistance struck a nerve far beyond my block, and I realized something else. 2. Power is never really about authority. It's about influence, integrity, respect. You can be a president, a board member, a landlord. None of that matters if no one believes in you. But when you lead with transparency, when you tell the truth, even when it's uncomfortable, people follow. Not because they have to, but because they want to. I saw that in the neighbors who once avoided HOA meetings, now showing up early with their ideas and coffee mugs. I saw it in the kids who used to hide behind hedges, now organizing bake sales for park benches. I saw it in the quiet smiles I'd get while working on my car, smiles that once would have been judgmental stares, and I saw it, most of all, in myself. I didn't just win a board seat. I rediscovered a part of me I hadn't used in years. The part that builds, not just fixes. The part that doesn't just defend what I own, but expands what others feel. Ownership of 2. This experience reminded me that when you create something meaningful, be it a classic car, a garden, or a fair community, you don't just add value to your life, you give other people permission to do the same. Now, a year and a half later, the HOA runs like a cope. We rotate leadership. We vote on everything. The money, it's tracked, published monthly, and we've even used surplus funds to help elderly residents with home repairs, something unthinkable under the old regime. Rick, well, he keeps to himself. Still lives a few streets over. Still mows his lawn with military precision. But every now and then, he nods at me when I drive by. Not a smile, not quite a peace offering, but a silent recognition. I think we both understand, now we were never enemies. We were just two people with very different ideas of what community should look like. And in the end, the better idea won. Not because it was louder, but because it included more people, because it listened, because it didn't punish, because it empowered. And that's what I hope people take from this story. You don't have to be rich. You don't have to be loud. You don't have to break the rules. You just have to know how to use them. You have to know how to read what's between the lines. You have to know that silence doesn't mean weakness and that strategy always beats tantrums. So the next time someone tries to box you in over your yard, your flag, your flaggers, your parking space, don't shrink, stand. You never know who's watching. You never know what neighbor is hoping you'll speak up first. So they finally have the courage to follow. Because sometimes the smallest battles over something as silly as a parking fine end up sparking the biggest change. And when the smoke clears and the neighborhood is finally a place you love again, you'll look around and realize it wasn't just about cars, it was about freedom, it was about home. And when you protect your home, when you defend it not just with words, but with purpose, with truth, and with heart, you don't just change the neighborhood. You become its engine. Stories end with a resolution. Mine didn't. It became a beginning. You see, when everything quieted down, I had time to reflect not just on what happened with Rick or the HOA, but on the deeper meaning behind it all. How something as small as a neighborhood dispute turned into something that would change the way I looked at leadership, property, and community forever. And one night, as I sat out in my driveway under the soft glow of the street lamp staring at the lines of polished chrome on my old Mustang, I started to ask myself a different kind of question. What now? I had spent so much time reacting, defending my name, my home, my rights, that I never stopped to think what kind of leader I could be if I wasn't fighting anymore. What could I build if I didn't have to protect what I already owned but could focus on lifting others up? That's when I had the idea. I created something I called the Community Builder Fund. It started with a small donation from me, nothing grand, just seed money. I opened an account, built a web page, and explained it as simply as possible. If you've ever felt bullied by your HOA, if you're a homeowner being fined into silence, if you want to make your neighborhood fairer, and Kinderwheel help you start. Within 3 months, we had enough to support 5 neighborhoods, not just with advice, but with real resources, legal templates, lawyer referrals, election toolkits, even small grants to help residents pay down unfair fines or hold community elections. It wasn't flashy, it didn't go viral, but it mattered. One of the first letters I received was from a woman in Nevada. Her HOA had fined her $500 for putting a raised flower bed in her front yard. They claimed it violated soil uniformity regulations. You can't make this stuff up. She used our resources, rallied her neighbors, and ran for the board. She won. And 6 months later, not only had she overturned the flower bed, ruled her neighborhood built a community garden. That one story, worth everything. Because it reminded me, this wasn't just about real estate, or bylaws, or titles. It was about people feeling at home. And what is home? Really, it's not square footage or siding color. It's not whether you drive a Honda or a vintage Corvette. Home is where you feel safe, where you feel respected, where you don't flinch. Every time a white envelope with HOA shows up in your mailbox. That's what I wanted to protect, not just for me, but for everyone. I started giving talks at community centers, at real estate meets, even Zoom seminars. People came not just to hear my story, but to share theirs. The woman fined for having her grandkids' chalk drawings on the sidewalk. The man told to repaint his house because the shade of tan he used wasn't HOA approved. The single dad who was fined for having a basketball hoop visible from the street. Each story echoed the same thing. Rules without reason. Authority without empathy. So I kept going, and something amazing happened. I stopped being just that guy. With the cars, I became something more. A catalyst. A reminder to people that you can fight back and win. That you don't have to burn bridges. You can build new roads. That the system isn't always broken. Sometimes, it just needs to be reclaimed. The cars, still in my driveway. Still polished, still a few too many for some people's taste, but they're not a problem anymore. They're a symbol, a reminder of what happens when one person stops backing down and starts stepping up. A reminder that sometimes power isn't loud. It's parked, patient, prepared. And now, when someone new moves into the neighborhood and asks about that whole car situation, the neighbors smile. They tell them the story, how the board tried to push me out, how I owned more homes than anyone else, how I turned the HOA into something people actually trusted, and I hope, deep down, they hear the real message. Don't let yourself be bullied. Not by letters, not by fear, not by a few people drunk on a little bit of power, because change doesn't always come with a protest. Sometimes it comes with a simple decision to say, no, I know the rules, and I'm not moving my car. That's how it starts, and from there, you drive forward. You take the wheel, and one day you look up and realize the road belongs to you now.